My soul. Tomorrow's marriage question was supposed to have a simple answer. But the name your soulmate spoke made the entire room fall into complete silence. One unexpected confession shattered years of hidden lies in just a few seconds. Someone secretly recorded every word. Because they knew nobody would believe what was about to happen. By the time the conversation ended, one family member was already crying. And another quietly walked out of the room. Listen carefully. Nobody expected that evening to become the moment that changed everything forever. Your soulmate had only gone to a quiet family gathering where everyone believed the future would finally be decided. Relatives filled the house with confident smiles, believing they already knew what tomorrow would bring. The conversations were calm, the dinner table was full, and every person assumed the marriage discussion would end exactly as planned. But hidden beneath those peaceful faces was a question nobody had dared to ask until that night. The oldest member of the family slowly looked toward your soulmate, paused for several seconds, and then asked in a calm but serious voice, if tomorrow became your final chance to choose the person you would marry, who would it be? Every fork stopped moving. Every whisper disappeared. Even the laughter from the children outside suddenly felt distant. Don't skip. Because this single question carried a secret that had been buried for years. Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Instead, they lowered their eyes as though searching through memories they had tried so hard to forget. Everyone around the table believed they already knew the answer. After all, another marriage proposal had recently entered the family, preparations had quietly begun, and several relatives were already discussing dates, invitations, and celebrations. But none of them realized that your soulmate's heart had never truly left the place where your story began. They remembered every goodbye that was forced upon them. Every misunderstanding that someone else created. Every message that mysteriously disappeared before reaching you. And every promise they were pressured to break. While the room waited impatiently, one relative smiled confidently, believing their plan had finally succeeded. They had spent years convincing everyone that you were no longer important, that destiny had moved on, and that another future should now replace the old one. What they didn't know was that truth has an unusual habit of waiting until the perfect moment before revealing itself. Several long seconds passed before your soulmate slowly lifted their head. Their eyes weren't filled with fear anymore. They were filled with certainty. The confidence in their expression immediately unsettled everyone watching. The same relative who had been smiling only moments earlier suddenly stopped breathing comfortably. It was almost as though they sensed something was about to happen that could never be undone. Another family member quietly reached for their phone beneath the table and pressed the record button without saying a single word. Nobody noticed. They simply felt that whatever happened next would become unforgettable. Your soulmate took one slow breath and finally spoke. If tomorrow truly gave me one final chance to choose, they whispered, that I would still choose the person my heart never stopped loving. Complete silence filled the room. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The words hung in the air like a secret that had waited years to be spoken aloud. One aunt immediately asked the question everyone else was afraid to ask. "Who?" she said softly, almost afraid of hearing the answer. Your soulmate closed their eyes for only a moment before speaking the name everyone believed had disappeared from their life forever. You. The reaction was immediate. A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered across the floor. One elderly relative covered their mouth in complete disbelief. Another quietly stood up and walked toward the window, unable to hide the tears forming in their eyes. Even the person who had spent years trying to separate both of you suddenly turned pale. They never imagined your name would still live inside your soulmate's heart with such strength. Don't skip. Because what happened after your name was spoken became even more unbelievable. The room instantly divided into two sides. Some relatives remained speechless, while others began asking questions that nobody had answered honestly before. "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" someone asked. Another quietly added, "Who convinced everyone that this chapter had already ended?" Those simple questions suddenly made several people extremely uncomfortable. Eyes slowly turned toward one particular family member who had always controlled every important decision. Their hands began shaking. Their confident smile completely disappeared. They realized the conversation was moving toward a truth they had hidden for years. Before anyone could speak again, your soulmate calmly reached into their pocket and removed a small folded piece of paper that looked old from being opened countless times. They placed it gently on the table without saying another word. Nobody knew what the paper contained. But everyone could see it meant everything. And just as one family member slowly unfolded it, their face lost all color. Don't skip. Because the paper lying on that table was never meant to be seen by anyone else. The room remained frozen as the folded paper was carefully opened. No one dared to interrupt. Every eye stayed fixed on the trembling hands of the family member reading it. At first, their expression showed only curiosity. Then confusion. Then complete disbelief. Their lips parted, but no words came out. It wasn't an ordinary note. It was a handwritten promise your soulmate had made years ago after the day both of you were forced apart. Every sentence carried the weight of a love that had never disappeared. It spoke about waiting, about refusing to replace genuine feelings with convenience, and about believing that truth always finds its way back, no matter how many lies stand in front of it. Several relatives quietly exchanged nervous glances. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier had completely vanished. Even those who had supported the new marriage proposal could feel that something much deeper had been hidden from them all this time. One uncle finally broke the silence. "Where did this come from?" he asked in a low voice. Your soulmate looked directly into his eyes before answering. "I wrote it the night I realized someone had been making decisions for my life without ever asking what my heart wanted." Those words landed like thunder inside the room. The same relative who had always insisted that you had moved on suddenly looked away, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Tiny details from the past began returning to everyone's memory. Messages that mysteriously never arrived. Unexpected arguments that seemed to appear from nowhere. Family meetings where only one side of the story had ever been told. Piece by piece, the perfect picture they had believed for years started falling apart. Don't skip. Because someone sitting in that very room was beginning to realize their secret could no longer stay buried. An elderly woman who had remained silent throughout the evening slowly stood up and walked toward your soulmate. Tears filled her eyes before she gently placed her hand on their shoulder. "Tell us everything," she whispered. "No more protecting anyone." Your soulmate took a slow breath. They explained how every attempt to reconnect with you had somehow failed. Important letters had disappeared before reaching you. Phone calls had mysteriously gone unanswered because the numbers had been changed without explanation. Even when fate created opportunities for both of you to meet again, someone always found a reason to prevent it. At first, your soulmate believed these were painful coincidences. But after years of watching the same pattern repeat again and again, they understood that coincidences don't follow the same person forever. Someone had been quietly controlling the story from the shadows. The atmosphere became heavier with every passing second. One cousin suddenly remembered an argument from years ago involving a missing envelope. Another recalled hearing someone say they should never meet again. At the time, nobody questioned those words. Now, they echoed through the room with frightening clarity. The family member who had remained unusually quiet began wiping sweat from their forehead. Their breathing became uneven. Every memory shared around the table pushed them closer to the truth they had desperately hoped would never return. No one accused them directly. Not yet. But the silence itself felt louder than any accusation. Then something unexpected happened. A young niece quietly walked into the dining room carrying a small wooden box. "I found this while cleaning Grandma's old cabinet," she said innocently. "Someone wrote your name on it years ago." The room instantly turned toward the box. Dust covered its edges, proving it had been hidden for a very long time. Your soulmate stared at it as though looking at a forgotten chapter of their own life. Slowly, they accepted the box with trembling hands. The lock had already rusted, making it difficult to open. After several careful attempts, it finally clicked. Inside were old photographs, a dried flower, and a sealed envelope. Across the front of the envelope, in unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Open only if the truth has finally come back." No one breathed. Because everyone suddenly understood. Someone had hidden this box for years. And whoever hid it was sitting in that room. The moment those words were read aloud, the entire room seemed to lose its breath. No one reached for the envelope. No one even suggested opening it immediately. It felt as though every person present understood that once its seal was broken, there would be no returning to the version of the story they had believed for so many years. Your soulmate slowly ran their fingers across the faded handwriting, recognizing every curve of the letters. Their eyes filled with emotion because they knew exactly who had written it. This, they whispered, that was supposed to reach me years ago. A wave of shock spread through the family. Several relatives looked at one another, silently asking the same question. If this letter was written years ago, then who kept it hidden? The answer was standing somewhere inside that house. Don't skip. Because the next few moments would force someone to face a truth they had spent years trying to bury. Your soulmate carefully broke the old seal. The paper inside had yellowed with time, but every word remained perfectly clear. They began reading in a trembling voice. The letter spoke of hope instead of anger, patience instead of revenge, and a promise that real love should never be destroyed by fear or manipulation. It revealed that the writer had discovered someone was quietly interfering between the two of you, making sure every opportunity to reconnect disappeared before it could become reality. There was even a warning written near the end: if you are reading this much later than it was written, it means someone succeeded in keeping us apart longer than they ever should have. But truth cannot stay imprisoned forever. The room became painfully silent. One aunt covered her face as tears rolled down her cheeks. Another relative quietly admitted they had once been told you no longer cared. Yet hearing the letter made that story impossible to believe. Every sentence exposed another crack in the carefully constructed lie that had controlled everyone's decisions. Then, just as your soulmate reached the final page, something unexpected slipped from between the folded sheets and landed on the table. It wasn't another letter. It was an old photograph. Everyone leaned closer. The picture showed you and your soulmate years earlier, smiling without fear, completely unaware of the storm that would later separate your lives. On the back of the photograph was a short handwritten sentence: if anyone ever tells you this love wasn't real, don't believe them. Those few words carried more weight than hours of explanation. The elderly grandmother slowly picked up the photograph, stared at it for several seconds, and then turned toward one particular family member. Her expression changed from sadness to quiet disappointment. I remember this picture, she said softly. It disappeared the same week someone told me they had thrown away everything connected to them. Every head slowly turned in the same direction. The person who had remained silent throughout the evening could no longer hide their fear. Their hands began shaking uncontrollably. Before anyone could question them, the front door suddenly opened. A stranger stepped inside holding another sealed envelope. Looking directly at your soulmate, they quietly said, "I'm sorry I couldn't deliver this years ago. But what it contains will explain who stopped your future together." The room fell into complete silence as every eye shifted toward the stranger standing at the doorway. No one recognized them immediately, yet the expression on their face carried the weight of someone who had lived with regret for far too long. They held the second envelope with both hands as though it were something far more valuable than paper. Your soulmate slowly walked forward, their heart pounding louder with every step. Before accepting it, they asked the question everyone else wanted answered. "Who are you?" The stranger lowered their eyes for a moment before replying, "Years ago, I was asked to deliver several messages between two people who loved each other more than anything. I completed every delivery. Except one. I have carried that failure with me every single day since then." A wave of disbelief spread across the room. Several relatives exchanged stunned glances, realizing this wasn't just another coincidence. This person had unknowingly become part of the story that had separated two hearts. Don't skip. Because the confession that followed would expose a chain of decisions no one had ever imagined. The stranger carefully explained that many years earlier they had worked for a small courier service in the town where both families once lived. One afternoon they received a special request to deliver a sealed envelope directly into your soulmate's hands. They remembered the instructions clearly because the sender had repeated them several times. "Please don't give this to anyone else. It must reach them personally." But when they arrived at the house, your soulmate wasn't there. Instead, another family member greeted them warmly, smiled confidently, and insisted they would personally hand over the envelope later that evening. Believing they were helping, the courier agreed without hesitation. Days passed. Weeks passed. Months passed. The sender eventually returned asking why there had never been a reply. Only then did the courier realize something had gone terribly wrong. They searched for the envelope but could never find it again. Shame kept them silent. Years later, while cleaning an old storage room after the family moved away, they discovered another sealed envelope hidden inside a forgotten box, along with a handwritten note instructing that if the truth was ever questioned, it should finally be delivered. That envelope was the one now resting in your soulmate's trembling hands. The family member who had accepted the original delivery years ago suddenly became visibly uncomfortable. Their breathing grew uneven. They tried to interrupt, insisting the courier must have remembered incorrectly. But before they could continue, the elderly grandmother quietly stood up. Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried undeniable authority. "No," she said. "I remember that afternoon now. I remember seeing a visitor at the gate. And I remember someone telling me there was nothing important in the package." Her eyes slowly filled with tears. I believed those words without asking another question. One by one, forgotten memories returned to the rest of the family. An uncle recalled seeing unopened letters in a drawer. A cousin remembered overhearing someone say, if they stop talking long enough, they'll eventually forget each other. The room grew heavier with every recollection. The silence was no longer protecting anyone. It was exposing them. Your soulmate finally opened the newly delivered envelope. Inside was another handwritten letter. But this one contained something no one expected. Folded within its pages was a list of dates, each accompanied by a short note. Every date matched an important moment when you had tried to reconnect: calls placed, letters sent, meetings arranged, even one planned visit that had mysteriously been cancelled at the last minute. Beside each date was a brief handwritten sentence describing exactly how the attempt had been blocked. Some messages had been hidden. Some phone numbers had been changed. Some meetings had been cancelled by someone pretending to speak on another person's behalf. As the list continued, one name appeared over and over again. The same name. The same handwriting. The same person whose calm expression had finally disappeared. No one spoke. Because for the first time, the family wasn't dealing with rumors anymore. They were looking at proof. The list remained on the table, and no one dared to touch it. Every page carried another date. Another missed opportunity. Another moment when destiny had almost brought you and your soulmate back together, only for someone to quietly interfere before it could happen. The silence inside the room became almost unbearable. The family member whose name appeared again and again slowly lowered their head, knowing there was nowhere left to hide. They searched for excuses, for explanations, for anything that could soften what had been revealed. But every attempt faded before it could even become words. The evidence was too detailed. The memories shared by everyone else matched the dates perfectly. One by one, the family realized they had spent years believing a story that had been carefully written by someone who feared the truth more than anything else. Don't skip. Because the next decision would change every future plan that had already been made.